Picture this. It's 1893 and you're standing in a massive factory in Prussia. The air is thick with smoke and the rhythmic pounding of machinery. Workers move in perfect synchronization, each person performing the same task hour after hour, day after day. They don't question, they don't innovate, they don't think outside their assigned role, they simply obey, comply and produce. Now, fast forward 130 years, walk into any classroom in America, or frankly, anywhere in the world. What do you see? Rows of desks facing forward, children sitting in assigned seats, raising their hands for permission to speak, moving when a bell rings, learning what they're told to learn, thinking what they're told to think. They don't question the system. They don't challenge the curriculum. They don't explore their unique interests or talents. They simply obey, comply, and produce the exact same behaviors their teachers want to see. Here's the uncomfortable truth that no one in the education establishment wants you to realize. The modern school system wasn't designed to create thinkers, innovators, or entrepreneurs. It was literally, explicitly, purposefully designed to create obedient factory workers for the industrial age. And we're still using that exact same system to prepare children for a world that no longer exists. But here's where it gets really disturbing. We're not just using an outdated system by accident. We're perpetuating it on purpose, because it serves the interests of people who need employees more than the world needs entrepreneurs. Think about it. Who benefits from a population of people who never question authority, who always seek external validation, who are terrified of failure, who prefer security over freedom, who follow instructions rather than forge their own paths? The answer is obvious. Large corporations, government bureaucracies, and anyone else who needs a steady supply of compliant workers who won't rock the boat, challenge the status quo, or threaten existing power structures. Today, we're going to expose one of the most sophisticated psychological programming systems ever created. We're going to reveal how 12 to 16 years of schooling systematically destroys the entrepreneurial spirit that every child is born with. We're going to show you why the education system doesn't just fail to create entrepreneurs. It's specifically designed to make entrepreneurship feel impossible, terrifying, and irresponsible. But more importantly, we're going to show you how to recognize this programming in yourself, how to deprogram the limiting beliefs it installed, and how to reclaim the creative, innovative, fearless spirit that the education system spent years trying to crush. Are you ready to question everything you've been taught about learning, success, and what it means to be intelligent? Because what you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you see not just education, but the entire structure of modern society. And it might just be the key to unlocking potential you never knew you had. The factory workers of 1893 didn't know they were in a factory. They thought they were just going to work. The question is, do you know you're still in that same factory? Or have you been so well programmed that you think the assembly line is the only way to live? Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was 8 years old when he started his first business. He noticed that kids in his neighborhood were always losing their soccer balls in the woods behind their houses, so he started a soccer ball rescue service. He'd search the woods, find the lost balls, and return them for a small fee. By age 10, he had saved enough money to buy a bicycle. Marcus was a natural entrepreneur. He saw problems and created solutions. He took initiative without being told. He wasn't afraid of failure because he didn't even know failure was something to be afraid of. He was curious, creative, and confident. He was exactly what the world needed more of. Then Marcus started school. At first it wasn't so bad, but gradually, year after year, something started to change. When Marcus suggested a different way to solve a math problem, he was told there was only one correct method. When he asked why they had to learn about the Civil War instead of how businesses work, he was told to stop asking questions and pay attention. When he started a small trading card business during lunch, he was shut down because it was, well, inappropriate for school. By middle school, Marcus had learned some new rules. There is always one right answer. Authority figures know best. Questioning the system is disrespectful. Following instructions is more important than thinking for yourself. Your worth is determined by how well you perform on standardized tests. Creativity is fine for art class, but the real world requires conformity. By high school, Marcus had internalized these lessons completely. He stopped seeing problems as opportunities and started seeing them as obstacles. He stopped taking initiative and started waiting for instructions. He stopped trusting his own judgment and started seeking external validation. He became terrified of making mistakes because, well, mistakes meant bad grades, disappointed parents, and reduced chances of getting into a good college. When Marcus graduated from college with a business degree, he had spent 16 years being trained to be an employee. He had been conditioned to believe that success meant getting hired by someone else, following someone else's vision, building someone else's dreams. The 8-year-old entrepreneur who had once seen the world as full of possibilities now saw it as full of barriers, regulations, and requirements. Marcus got a job at a Fortune 500 company. He was good at it, and after all, he'd been trained for 16 years to follow instructions, meet deadlines, and avoid making waves. But honestly, something felt wrong. He'd lie awake at night, thinking about the business ideas he used to have, the problems he used to solve, the excitement he used to feel about creating something new. One day, Marcus was sitting in his cubicle when a 22-year-old college dropout walked into his company's offices for a meeting. This kid had started an app in his dorm room that was now worth millions. As Marcus listened to this young entrepreneur talk about his business, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Envy, not for the money, but for the courage, for the willingness to bet on himself, for the entrepreneurial spirit that Marcus realized he had lost somewhere between kindergarten and graduation. That night, Marcus started researching the history of education. What he discovered changed everything. He learned that the modern school system was designed in Prussia in the 1800s with the explicit goal of creating obedient soldiers and factory workers. He learned that John D. Rockefeller, who helped fund the American education system, once said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." Marcus realized that his transformation from entrepreneur to employee wasn't accidental. It wasn't a natural part of growing up. It was the result of a systematic psychological conditioning program disguised as education. He had been programmed to be a worker, not a creator, trained to be a follower, not a leader, conditioned to seek security, not opportunity. The most heartbreaking part of Marcus's story isn't that the system failed him, it's that the system succeeded perfectly. It took a naturally curious, creative, entrepreneurial child and transformed him into exactly what it was designed to create: a compliant, risk-averse, authority-dependent employee who would never threaten the existing order. But Marcus's story doesn't end there, because recognizing the programming is the first step to breaking free from it. And when Marcus started to deprogram himself, something remarkable happened. That 8-year-old entrepreneur didn't disappear. He had just been buried under years of conditioning. And slowly, carefully, Marcus began to dig him out. Marcus's story is playing out in millions of lives around the world. Children who enter school as natural entrepreneurs graduate as programmed employees. The system doesn't just fail to nurture entrepreneurial thinking, it actively, systematically, deliberately destroys it. And here's the most disturbing part: this isn't happening by accident, this is happening by design. The education system is working exactly as intended. The question is, what was it intended to do, and who does it really serve? Now let's dive deep into the psychological mechanisms that transform natural entrepreneurs into programmed employees. What you're about to learn will explain why the current education system doesn't just fail to create entrepreneurs, it's specifically designed to make entrepreneurial thinking feel dangerous, irresponsible, and impossible. The foundation of this programming lies in what psychologists call external locus of control. Children are born with an internal locus of control. They believe their actions affect their outcomes. When a toddler wants something, they go get it. When they see a problem, they try to solve it. When they have an idea, they act on it. This is natural, entrepreneurial thinking. But the school system systematically replaces internal locus of control with external locus of control. Students learn that their success depends not on their initiative, creativity, or problem-solving ability, but on their compliance with external authorities. They learn that the right answer comes from the teacher, not from their own thinking. They learn that opportunities come from institutions, not from their own efforts. Here's how this psychological transformation happens. Every day, for 12 to 16 years, children practice giving up their agency. They can't choose what to learn, when to learn it, how to learn it, or why they should learn it. They can't choose when to eat, when to use the bathroom, when to speak, or where to sit. They can't choose their schedule, their curriculum, or even their classmates. They are systematically trained to believe that other people should make all the important decisions about their lives. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness on a massive scale. Children who once believed they could create their own solutions start believing they need experts to solve their problems. They start believing they need credentials to be taken seriously, institutions to provide opportunities, and authorities to validate their worth. The grading system is perhaps the most insidious part of this psychological conditioning. Think about what grades actually teach. Your worth is determined by external evaluation. Someone else decides whether your work is good or bad. You should modify your thinking to match what evaluators want to see rather than following your own curiosity or judgment. But here's what's really devastating about grades. They train children to become addicted to external validation, while simultaneously making them terrified of failure. Entrepreneurs need to be comfortable with failure because failure is how you learn, iterate, and improve. But the school system teaches that failure is catastrophic. It goes on your permanent record, disappoints authority figures, and reduces your future opportunities. This creates what I call failure phobia, a deep psychological terror of making mistakes that makes entrepreneurship feel impossibly risky. How can you start a business when you've been conditioned to believe that failure means you're a bad person? How can you take creative risks when you've been trained to believe that the safe, approved path is the only responsible choice? The education system also systematically destroys what psychologists call intrinsic motivation. That's the drive that comes from internal satisfaction, curiosity, and personal meaning. Research shows that when you give people external rewards for activities they already enjoy, they actually become less motivated to do those activities. The school system does this on an industrial scale. Children who love learning become focused on grades instead of knowledge. Children who love creating become focused on meeting assignment requirements instead of expressing their authentic vision. Children who love exploring become focused on covering required material instead of following their curiosity. The system literally trains intrinsic motivation out of children and replaces it with dependence on external rewards and punishments. This is devastating for entrepreneurial development because, well, entrepreneurs are driven primarily by intrinsic motivation. They start businesses because they're passionate about solving problems, creating value, or building something meaningful. But the education system conditions children to only do things when someone else tells them to, rewards them for it, or threatens to punish them if they don't. Let's talk about what happens to creativity under this system. Research by Dr. George Land found that 98% of 5-year-olds score at the creative genius level on his creativity test. The same test given to 10-year-olds shows that only 30% score at the genius level. By 15, it's down to 12%. By adulthood, only 2% of people score at the creative genius level. What happens between ages 5 and 15? School. The education system systematically trains creativity out of children by teaching them that there's only one right answer, one correct method, one approved way of thinking. Entrepreneurship requires creative thinking, but the school system treats creative thinking as a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be nurtured. The standardized testing obsession makes this even worse. When schools are evaluated based on test scores, teachers are incentivized to focus on memorization and repetition rather than critical thinking and problem solving. Students learn to regurgitate information rather than question it, to follow formulas rather than create new approaches, to seek the right answer rather than explore multiple possibilities. But perhaps the most psychologically damaging aspect of the current education system is how it handles time and scheduling. Entrepreneurs need to understand that time is their most valuable resource, that they can create their own schedule, that productivity comes from focus and passion rather than from sitting in assigned seats for prescribed periods. But the school system teaches exactly the opposite. It teaches that someone else controls your time, that you should switch between unrelated tasks every 45 minutes whether you're engaged or not, that showing up and sitting still is more important than producing valuable results. It literally trains entrepreneurial thinking out of children by making them practice being passive recipients of other people's agendas. The career counseling system completes this psychological programming. Students are taught to choose from a limited menu of pre-existing career paths rather than imagining new possibilities. They're encouraged to find jobs, not create jobs. They're taught to fit into the existing economy rather than to build new parts of the economy. Here's what ancient wisdom traditions understood that modern education has forgotten. True intelligence isn't about memorizing information or following instructions. It's about wisdom, creativity, adaptability, and the courage to think independently. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu wrote, "The best leaders are those who lead without the people realizing they are being led." But the education system creates followers who can't even imagine leading. Socrates, considered one of history's greatest teachers, never gave his students answers. He asked questions that helped them discover their own understanding. His method created independent thinkers who could navigate uncertainty and create new knowledge. But the modern education system does exactly the opposite. It gives students pre-packaged answers and punishes them for questioning those answers. The Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, approaching situations with openness, eagerness, and freedom from preconceptions, is essential for entrepreneurial success. But the education system fills children's minds with so many preconceptions, rules, and shoulds that they lose the ability to see fresh possibilities. Indigenous education systems around the world traditionally focused on developing each child's unique gifts and preparing them to contribute to their community in their own distinctive way. But the industrial education system treats all children as identical units to be processed through the same standardized program, regardless of their individual talents, interests, or potential contributions. The result is a psychological pandemic of what I call employee mindset, a learned helplessness that makes people believe they need someone else to provide them with opportunities, someone else to tell them what to do, someone else to validate their worth, and someone else to take responsibility for their success or failure. But here's what the education establishment doesn't want you to know. Every natural human instinct that makes for successful entrepreneurship, curiosity, creativity, risk-taking, independent thinking, problem-solving, initiative, is systematically discouraged and punished by the current system. We're not failing to create entrepreneurs by accident. We're succeeding at destroying them on purpose. Here's the part of the story they don't teach in education courses, the hidden history that explains why your school experience felt more like psychological conditioning than intellectual development. What I'm about to reveal will make you see every classroom, every homework assignment, every standardized test in a completely different light. The modern education system wasn't created by educators who wanted to help children learn and grow. It was created by industrialists who needed a reliable supply of compliant workers, and they were remarkably honest about their intentions. In 1902, John D. Rockefeller created the General Education Board with a stunning mission statement: In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise up among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians. Nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple as well as a very beautiful one, to train these people as we find them to a perfectly ideal life just where they are. Now just take a moment and read that again. Perfect docility, our molding hand. We shall not try to make these people into philosophers or men of learning. This wasn't education. This was psychological programming designed to create what Rockefeller called the ideal life for workers, accepting your station, never questioning authority, never aspiring beyond your assigned role. The Prussian education system that America adopted was even more explicit about its goals. It was designed to create three types of people: a small leadership class who would think and make decisions, a slightly larger class of engineers and managers who would implement those decisions, and a massive class of workers who would follow orders without question. The system was never intended to develop every child's potential. It was intended to sort children into predetermined social and economic roles. Frederick Taylor, the father of scientific management, explicitly connected factory efficiency to educational methods. He believed that just as factories should eliminate worker creativity and independent thinking to maximize efficiency, schools should eliminate student creativity and independent thinking to maximize compliance. Taylor wrote, "In the past, the man has been first. In the future, the system must be first. This is why schools are organized like factories, standardized inputs, which is the curriculum, standardized processes, meaning teaching methods, standardized outputs like test scores, and standardized quality control, which are grades. Children are treated like raw materials moving through an assembly line, with each grade level representing a different stage of processing." But here's where this gets really sinister. The industrialists who designed this system understood psychology better than most modern educators do. They knew that to create compliant workers, they needed to start early and be systematic about breaking down natural human traits that interfere with factory efficiency. Curiosity had to be trained out, because curious workers ask inconvenient questions and waste time exploring possibilities that don't serve production goals. So schools created rigid curricula that punish students for following their interests instead of following the prescribed lesson plan. Initiative had to be discouraged because workers who take initiative might disrupt established processes or challenge authority. So schools created systems where students need permission for everything: to speak, to move, to use the bathroom, to explore topics that interest them. Risk-taking had to be eliminated because risk-taking workers might make mistakes that cost money or time. So schools created zero-tolerance policies for failure, making every mistake a permanent mark on your record rather than a learning opportunity. Independent thinking had to be suppressed because independent thinkers might come up with ideas that threaten existing power structures. So schools created standardized testing systems that reward memorization and conformity while punishing original thought and creative problem solving. The results of this systematic conditioning are exactly what the designers intended. Generations of people who are terrified of starting their own businesses, who believe they need someone else to provide them with jobs, who seek security over opportunity, who follow expert advice rather than trusting their own judgment, who prefer the familiar misery of employment to the uncertain freedom of entrepreneurship. Here's a question that should disturb you. If the education system was really designed to help children succeed in life, why doesn't it teach them about money, business, investing, marketing, sales, leadership, or any of the skills that actually determine financial success? Why does it teach them to memorize historical dates they'll never use, instead of teaching them how to create value that others will pay for? The answer is obvious. Because teaching those skills would create entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs threaten the system that requires a steady supply of employees. But let me share something that will blow your mind. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs in history were either homeschooled, dropped out of school, or actively rebelled against the education system. Thomas Edison was told by his teachers that he was too dumb to learn anything. Albert Einstein said, "Education is what remains after one has forgotten what one has learned in school." Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Richard Branson, all of them succeeded not because of their formal education, but despite it. These entrepreneurs succeeded because they managed to maintain what the education system tries to destroy, the belief that they could create their own opportunities, solve their own problems, and build their own futures without waiting for someone else's permission or approval. And here's the most telling evidence that the system is working exactly as designed. Most people, when they hear about someone starting their own business, don't think, "How exciting," or "What a great opportunity." They think, "How risky," or "How irresponsible." The education system has conditioned us to see entrepreneurship as dangerous and employment as safe, even though history shows exactly the opposite is true. The employee mindset, carefully cultivated by 16 years of schooling, operates from scarcity and fear. It teaches you that opportunities are limited, that someone else controls your destiny, that security comes from external sources, and that your value is determined by how well you fit into existing systems. In the employee mindset, you wait for permission, you seek approval before taking action, you look for experts to tell you what to do, you believe that credentials matter more than results, that following the rules is more important than achieving outcomes, and that job security is more valuable than personal freedom. The employee mindset teaches you to think small and play it safe. You focus on minimizing risk rather than maximizing opportunity. You choose the path of least resistance rather than the path of greatest potential. You prioritize comfort over growth, security over adventure, acceptance over authenticity. Most devastatingly, the employee mindset makes you believe that your income is determined by someone else. You think your boss decides what you're worth. You think the market determines your opportunities. You think economic conditions control your financial future. You give away your power and then wonder why you feel powerless. The entrepreneur mindset, which is actually every human being's natural state before it gets conditioned out of them, operates from abundance and possibility. It recognizes that opportunities are infinite, that you can create your own destiny, that real security comes from your ability to create value, and that your worth is determined by how much value you contribute to the world. In the entrepreneur mindset, you take initiative without waiting for permission. You trust your own judgment over expert opinion. You see problems as opportunities rather than obstacles. You believe that results matter more than credentials, that breaking rules is sometimes necessary for breakthrough results, and that freedom is more valuable than security. The entrepreneur mindset teaches you to think big and embrace uncertainty. You focus on maximizing opportunity rather than minimizing risk. You choose the path of greatest potential rather than the path of least resistance. You prioritize growth over comfort, adventure over security, authenticity over acceptance. Most powerfully, the entrepreneur mindset makes you realize that your income is determined by how much value you create for others. You understand that the market rewards people who solve problems, not people who follow instructions. You take responsibility for your own financial future rather than hoping someone else will take care of you. But here's what's really fascinating. These aren't just different approaches to business. They're completely different ways of experiencing life itself. People with employee mindset see the world as happening to them. They feel like victims of circumstances, economic conditions, political decisions, and other people's choices. They spend their energy complaining about problems rather than solving them, hoping someone else will create opportunities rather than creating opportunities themselves. People with entrepreneur mindset see the world as something they can influence and shape. They feel like co-creators of their reality. They take responsibility for their circumstances and focus their energy on what they can control rather than what they can't. The employee mindset creates what psychologists call external validation dependency. Your self-worth depends on performance reviews, grades, approval from authority figures, and comparison to others. You become, addicted to praise and devastated by criticism. Over time, you lose touch with your own sense of what's valuable or worthwhile. On the other hand, the entrepreneur mindset develops internal validation systems. Your self-worth comes from your own assessment of whether you're living according to your values, growing as a person, and contributing something meaningful to the world. You appreciate feedback, of course, but you don't depend on it for your sense of identity. Here's a powerful example of this difference. When an employee gets laid off, they often experience it as a personal failure, a rejection, a sign that they're not good enough. They immediately start looking for another job, hoping someone else will hire them and validate their worth. When an entrepreneur's business fails, they usually experience it as valuable learning, market feedback, or information about what doesn't work. They immediately start thinking about how to apply those lessons to their next venture. They don't see failure as a verdict on their worth as a person. They see it as data about what strategies work and what strategies don't. The employee mindset makes you a thermometer, reactive to whatever environment you're in. Your mood, your confidence, your sense of possibility all depend on external conditions. When the economy is good, you feel optimistic. When your boss is happy with you, you feel valuable. When you get a raise, you feel successful. The entrepreneur mindset makes you a thermostat, capable of setting your own emotional and psychological temperature regardless of external conditions. You can feel optimistic during economic downturns because you trust your ability to create opportunities. You can feel valuable regardless of what authority figures think of you, because your value comes from your contribution to the world. You can feel successful regardless of your income level, because success is measured by your own standards rather than society's standards. But perhaps the most profound difference is this. The employee mindset makes you a consumer of opportunities created by others. The entrepreneur mindset makes you a creator of opportunities that others can benefit from. When you think like an employee, you're always waiting for someone else to create jobs, develop products, solve problems, or improve conditions. You see yourself as dependent on other people's vision, other people's capital, other people's leadership. When you think like an entrepreneur, you realize that you can be the person who creates jobs, develops products, solves problems, and improves conditions. You see yourself as a potential solution to problems, rather than as a person with problems that need to be solved by someone else. This shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of asking, how can I get hired? You start asking, what problems can I solve? Instead of asking, what benefits can I get? You start asking, what value can I create? And instead of asking, how can I advance in this company? You start asking, how can I build something that matters? Let's expose the invisible curriculum that schools teach alongside reading, writing, and arithmetic. This hidden curriculum is far more powerful than any official lesson plan because, it shapes how students think about themselves, their possibilities, and their place in the world. The hidden curriculum starts with the physical environment. Why are classrooms designed with all desks facing forward toward an authority figure? Why are students required to sit in assigned seats? Why do they need permission to move around? These aren't educational necessities. They're psychological conditioning techniques designed to normalize hierarchy, compliance, and external control. Think about what this physical arrangement teaches. Someone else decides where you belong. Your natural impulses to move, explore, and interact are inappropriate and need to be controlled. The most important person in the room is the authority figure, and your job is to pay attention to them rather than to your own thoughts, interests, or insights. The bell system that governs school schedules is directly borrowed from factory management. It teaches students that their time belongs to someone else, that they should start and stop activities based on external signals rather than internal rhythms. and that focus and engagement are less important than compliance with arbitrary schedules. But here's what's really insidious. This conditioning doesn't just affect how students behave in school, it affects how they think about life itself. After 12 years of practicing giving up their agency, most people never learn to take it back. They graduate believing that someone else should provide their schedule, their goals, their motivation, and their definition of success. The grading system teaches what I call scarcity thinking. There's only one A in each category. Success is limited. If someone else succeeds, there's less success available for you. This creates a competitive rather than collaborative mindset that makes entrepreneurship feel threatening rather than exciting. Real entrepreneurship thrives on abundance thinking, the recognition that value creation can benefit everyone, that multiple people can succeed simultaneously, that collaboration creates more opportunities than competition. But the school system trains students to see other people's success as a threat to their own success. The homework system normalizes what I call work-life invasion. Students learn that work should follow them home, that they should sacrifice family time and personal interests for institutional demands, that being constantly busy is a virtue rather than a dysfunction. This prepares them perfectly for corporate cultures that demand total life dedication in exchange for the illusion of security. But entrepreneurs need strong boundaries between work and life because they understand that creativity, innovation, and sustainable performance require rest, relationships, and activities that aren't directly productive. The homework system trains this wisdom out of children before they ever get a chance to develop it. The dress code system teaches external conformity as a virtue. Students learn that how you look is more important than what you think, that fitting in is more valuable than standing out, that personal expression should be subordinated to institutional preferences. This creates adults who are more concerned with appearing successful than with being authentic. The permission system is perhaps the most psychologically damaging aspect of the hidden curriculum. Students need permission to speak, to move, to use the bathroom, to get water, to explore topics that interest them. They practice asking permission thousands of times over their school career, creating what I call permission addiction. The belief that you need someone else's approval before taking action in your own life. Entrepreneurs, by definition, don't wait for permission. They see opportunities and act on them. They solve problems without being asked. They create value without being instructed. But the education system specifically trains this initiative out of children by making unauthorized action a punishable offense. The testing system teaches what I call single-answer thinking. For most test questions, there's one correct answer, and any other answer is wrong. This honestly trains students to believe that problems have predetermined solutions rather than multiple possible approaches. It teaches them to look for the right answer rather than to explore creative alternatives. But entrepreneurial problems rarely have single right answers. Should you launch this product now or wait 6 months? Should you focus on growth or profitability? Should you hire employees or use contractors? These questions require judgment, creativity, and comfort with uncertainty, all qualities that the testing system systematically discourages. The college preparation system completes the psychological programming by teaching students that their future success depends entirely on external validation from prestigious institutions. Students learn that getting accepted to the right college is more important than developing actual skills, knowledge, or wisdom. They learn that institutional approval matters more than personal growth. This creates what I call credential addiction, the belief that you need official permission to be taken seriously, that your worth is determined by what institutions have endorsed you, that learning only counts if it comes with a certificate or degree. This makes entrepreneurship feel impossible because there's no institution that gives you permission to start a business or validates your worth as an entrepreneur. But here's what's most tragic about this hidden curriculum. It doesn't just create employees, it creates fearful, dependent, validation-seeking employees who have lost touch with their own power, creativity, and potential. The system doesn't just fail to nurture entrepreneurs. It creates people who are psychologically incapable of even imagining entrepreneurship as a possibility. And here's the cruelest irony. In an economy where job security is disappearing, where artificial intelligence is automating traditional employment, where the most valuable skills are creativity, adaptability, and innovation, we're still using an education system designed to create the exact opposite qualities. We're preparing children for a world that no longer exists, while failing to prepare them for the world that's emerging. The hidden curriculum is so effective that most people never even realize they've been programmed. They think their fear of risk-taking is natural, their need for external validation is healthy, their preference for security over opportunity is wise. They don't realize these are learned behaviors that can be unlearned. Now comes the crucial question: how do you deprogram yourself from 16 years of anti-entrepreneurial conditioning? How do you reclaim the natural creativity, initiative, and fearlessness that the education system systematically destroyed? How do you transform from a programmed employee into a liberated entrepreneur? The first step is recognizing the programming for what it is. Start paying attention to your automatic thoughts and reactions when you consider entrepreneurial activities. Do you immediately think about credentials, experts, permission, or safety? Do you feel like you need to research everything exhaustively before taking any action? Do you worry more about what could go wrong than get excited about what could go right? These aren't your natural thoughts. They're programmed responses installed by years of conditioning. The first step to freedom is recognizing that these voices in your head aren't your voice. They're the internalized voice of a system designed to keep you dependent and compliant. Practice what I call permission rebellion. Start making small decisions without seeking external approval. Choose what to wear without wondering what others will think. Pick a restaurant without reading reviews. Express an opinion without researching whether it's the correct opinion. Start rebuilding your capacity to trust your own judgment. The second step is developing what I call failure immunity. The education system made you terrified of making mistakes, but entrepreneurs know that failure is just feedback. You need to systematically desensitize yourself to failure by deliberately seeking out low-stakes situations where you can practice failing without catastrophic consequences. Start a small side project that might not work. Try learning a new skill where you'll be bad at first. Apply for opportunities you might not get. Ask for things you might be refused. The goal isn't to fail. It's to discover that failure isn't the catastrophe the education system taught you it was. Practice what entrepreneurs call rapid prototyping in your personal life. Instead of planning everything perfectly before taking action, start experimenting with small, quick tests of your ideas. Launch before you're ready. Learn by doing rather than by studying. Value speed of iteration over perfection of execution. The third step is rebuilding your creative confidence. The education system convinced you that creativity is only for artists, that there's a difference between creative people and practical people, that imagination is less valuable than memorization. But entrepreneurship is fundamentally a creative act. It's about imagining possibilities that don't currently exist and bringing them into reality. Start practicing creativity in low-pressure situations. Doodle. Write. Brainstorm solutions to everyday problems. Come up with multiple ways to accomplish routine tasks. The goal is to rebuild your confidence in your own creative capacity and to remember that you can generate original ideas and solutions. The fourth step is developing what I call opportunity vision. The education system taught you to see problems as things to be avoided or solved by experts. But entrepreneurs, they see problems as opportunities to create value, to serve others, and to build something meaningful. So, start practicing this shift in perspective. When you encounter frustrations in your daily life, like slow internet, long lines, confusing processes, or expensive services. Instead of just complaining, ask yourself, how could this be improved? Who else faces this same problem? What would a solution look like? Could I create that solution? Now, this isn't about starting a business around every minor inconvenience. It's really about rewiring your brain to see possibilities where you once saw only problems. It's about developing what entrepreneurs call solution-oriented thinking instead of the complaint-oriented thinking that the education system encourages. The fifth step is reclaiming your relationship with money and value creation. The education system taught you that money comes from jobs, that someone else determines what you're worth, and that creating value requires credentials, experience, and institutional approval. But entrepreneurs understand that money is simply a measurement of how much value you create for others. So, start thinking about money as a scorecard rather than a goal. Instead of asking, how can I make more money? Ask, how can I create more value for others? Instead of thinking, I need someone to pay me, think, I need to solve problems that people will pay to have solved. Practice what I call value creation experiments. Look for small ways to create value for others without expecting immediate payment. Help someone solve a problem. Share knowledge that others find useful. Create something that makes people's lives better, easier, or more enjoyable. And just notice how creating value feels different from performing tasks for external rewards. The sixth step is developing entrepreneurial learning habits. The education system taught you that learning happens in classrooms, that experts should teach you, that you need to master theory before attempting practice. But entrepreneurs learn by doing, failing, adjusting, and trying again. So, start learning skills you're interested in through direct experience rather than formal instruction. Want to learn marketing? Start marketing something. Want to learn sales? Start selling something. Want to learn leadership? Start leading something. The education system convinced you that you need to prepare extensively before acting, but entrepreneurs know that action is preparation. The seventh step is building what I call entrepreneurial support systems. You see, the people around you were probably conditioned by the same educational programming that affected you. They may, often unconsciously, discourage entrepreneurial thinking because it threatens their own commitment to the employee mindset. So, seek out entrepreneurs, creators, and independent thinkers who can model different ways of thinking about work, money, and success. Read books by entrepreneurs, listen to podcasts by people who've built their own businesses, and, join communities of people who are creating their own opportunities rather than waiting for opportunities to be created for them. The eighth step is practicing what I call internal scorecard living. The education system really taught you to measure your worth by external metrics, things like grades, test scores, teacher approval, and, peer acceptance. But entrepreneurs, they develop internal metrics based on their own values and goals. So, define success for yourself. What would a truly successful life look like if no one else's opinion mattered? What would you pursue if you couldn't fail? What problems would you solve if you had unlimited confidence? And what would you create if you knew it would work? The ninth step is developing comfort with uncertainty. The education system provided, predictable schedules, clear expectations, and predetermined outcomes. But entrepreneurship requires comfort with ambiguity, change, and unknown results. Practice making decisions with incomplete information. Start projects without knowing exactly how they'll turn out. Take actions based on judgment and intuition, rather than detailed analysis and expert approval. Learn to see uncertainty as adventure rather than anxiety. The final step is what I call entrepreneurial identity reconstruction. You need to consciously reject the identity of employee or job seeker and start identifying as someone who creates their own opportunities. Now, this isn't about immediately quitting your job or starting a business. It's about fundamentally changing how you see yourself and your role in the economy. Start saying, I create value instead of I have a job. Start saying, I'm building something instead of I'm looking for work. Start saying, I solve problems instead of I follow instructions. Language shapes identity and identity shapes behavior. Here's what's beautiful about this deprogramming process. You don't have to choose between financial security and entrepreneurial freedom. You can start reclaiming your entrepreneurial mindset while maintaining whatever level of security you need. You can begin creating value on the side while keeping your day job. And you can start thinking like an entrepreneur before you're ready to act like one full time. As we reach the end of this journey together, I want you to close your eyes and imagine something with me. Imagine a world where children aren't taught to sit still and follow instructions, but to explore, create, and solve problems. Imagine a world where education develops each child's unique gifts, rather than forcing them all through the same standardized process. Imagine a world where young people graduate not as job seekers, but as opportunity creators. Imagine a world where failure is celebrated as learning, where creativity is valued over conformity, where initiative is rewarded over compliance. Imagine a world where people measure success not by how well they fit into existing systems, but by how much positive change they create in the world. This isn't a fantasy. This is what becomes possible when we stop accepting an education system designed to create employees and start demanding one designed to develop human potential. But here's what I need you to understand. You don't have to wait for the system to change. You can change yourself right now. You can start deprogramming the limiting beliefs that 16 years of schooling installed in your mind. You can start reclaiming the entrepreneurial spirit that you were born with but taught to suppress. The child who once saw the world as full of possibilities still exists inside you. The young person who once dreamed of creating something amazing is still there, buried under years of conditioning that told them to be realistic, be practical, be safe. The natural entrepreneur who once believed they could solve any problem and build any dream hasn't disappeared. They've just been sleeping, waiting for you to wake them up. Here's what I want you to remember. Every great entrepreneur started as someone who refused to accept the limitations that society placed on them. They refused to believe that they needed credentials to create value. They refused to believe that they needed permission to solve problems. They refused to believe that they needed someone else to provide their opportunities. Steve Jobs didn't wait for someone to give him permission to revolutionize technology. Oprah Winfrey didn't wait for someone to tell her she was qualified to build a media empire. Elon Musk didn't wait for experts to validate his ideas about electric cars or space travel. They all had one thing in common. They maintained or reclaimed the entrepreneurial thinking that the education system tries to destroy. And here's the most important thing to understand. You don't need to become the next Steve Jobs or Oprah Winfrey to benefit from thinking like an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurial thinking improves every aspect of your life, whether you ever start a business or not. When you think like an entrepreneur, you take responsibility for your own happiness instead of waiting for circumstances to make you happy. You create your own opportunities instead of waiting for someone else to provide them. You solve your own problems instead of hoping someone else will solve them for you. You build your own security through your capacity to create value rather than hoping someone else will keep you secure. Entrepreneurial thinking makes you more resilient because you know that even if you lose your job, your business fails, or your circumstances change, you still have the most important asset anyone can have, the ability to create value for others. That asset can never be taken away from you, can never be outsourced, can never become obsolete. But perhaps most importantly, entrepreneurial thinking reconnects you with your sense of purpose and possibility. Instead of feeling like a cog in someone else's machine, you start feeling like the architect of your own life. Instead of wondering what you're supposed to do, you start creating what you want to do. Instead of fitting into the world as it is, you start building the world as it could be. Here's my challenge to you. For the next 90 days, live like the entrepreneur you were born to be. Start seeing problems as opportunities. Start taking initiative without waiting for permission. Start creating value without waiting for someone to tell you how. Start trusting your own judgment instead of constantly seeking expert approval. For the next 90 days, practice thinking like someone who creates opportunities rather than someone who waits for opportunities. When you face a challenge, ask yourself, How would an entrepreneur approach this? When you see a problem, ask yourself, how could I solve this in a way that creates value for others? When you feel stuck, ask yourself, what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? And here's what I predict will happen. You'll start to remember who you really are beneath all the programming. You'll start to feel more confident, more creative, more capable. You'll start to see possibilities where you once saw only obstacles. You'll start to feel like the author of your own story rather than a character in someone else's story. The education system spent years convincing you that you need someone else to provide your job, your income, your opportunities, and your security. But the truth is that you are the most important factor in your own success. You have the power to learn anything, create anything, solve anything, and build anything you set your mind to. The only question is, are you going to keep believing the lie that you need someone else's permission to create the life you want? Or are you going to reclaim your birthright as a natural problem solver, value creator, and opportunity maker? The choice is yours. The system will always be there, ready to convince you that you're not qualified, not ready, not smart enough, not credentialed enough to bet on yourself. But you now know that system was never designed to serve your interests. It was designed to serve the interests of people who need employees more than the world needs entrepreneurs. So here's my final message. Stop being the product of an education system designed to limit your potential. Start being the creator of a life designed to maximize your potential. Stop asking for permission to live your dreams. Start granting yourself permission to build them. The world doesn't need more employees who follow instructions. The world needs more entrepreneurs who solve problems, create value, and build the future. The world needs people who think for themselves, who take initiative, who aren't afraid to fail, who care more about contributing than conforming. The world needs you to remember that you are not a product of the education system. You are not defined by your grades, your test scores, your credentials, or your compliance with institutional expectations. You are a human being with unlimited creative potential, unique gifts, and the natural ability to create opportunities rather than just consume them. The entrepreneurial spirit isn't something you learn, it's something you remember. It's not something you develop, it's something you uncover. It's not something you become. It's something you've always been, waiting for permission to emerge. Stop waiting for permission. The world is waiting for what you have to create. The factory has no power over you unless you give it that power. The assembly line has no claim on your life unless you accept that claim. The system has no authority over your potential unless you grant it that authority. You are not an employee pretending to be an entrepreneur. You are an entrepreneur who was temporarily programmed to think like an employee. It's time to remember who you really are. Welcome back to your entrepreneurial self. The world has been waiting for you to return.